I'm excited to hear all the comments and the questions, and pretty much everything that's been said is going to. I've got a little bit to address that here, and what I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to spend a few minutes on productivity. We're going to go through a little bit of some of the research that's been done on elk for the past 15 or so years, kind of give you an idea of what people look at productivity. But I wanted to start with this slide right here. And if you're looking at your handout, you'll see I've already slipped a slide in on you that wasn't in the file that I sent to Nashville the other day, because I put this together yesterday morning because I felt like that Commissioner Cannon's questions are kind of the reason I put this slide in. So 2006 was the first year we did the survey, and it threw us a number out of 203, okay? And with that confidence interval that Steve is talking about, and I don't have that CI with me, but that's the number it spits out. Well, over the next 3 years, this same survey, doing the same methodology, gave us 14, 29, and 31% increases in the number. And it's important to know that that's just a number that the computer generates. You have to be real careful, because the first thing that comes to mind, and the agency caution folks on this, is the data out there and all the previous research tells us that if everything is perfect, the best you can really feasibly expect is a 24% increase. And, this model is throwing us out 29 and 31% increases. So we're really thinking, wait, this isn't good. Well, then the next 3 years, it came right back down, and we actually had 2 years of 30% and another 23% increase. And as the director said, we don't believe this elk population is up here doing these up and downs like this. Last 2 years, 4 and 14. So Steve mentioned the trend, and we kind of got off track there, but that's why we look at the trend. The trend is what's important, that red line going across through there over time, over 6 years, to try to pin down what's going on in an elk population in one given year is almost impossible. But when you do the same survey over a 6-year period, you start forming a trend. And as you can see here, this trend, if you drop out your points and just look at your line, it is showing growth. It's very slow. That's about a 3.7% growth rate right there. But what's important is whether that line represents 300 elk, 400 elk, or 500 elk over a 9 or 10 year period. You have a slowly growing elk herd. Now, the thing that we ask ourselves as an agency, it shows 3.7% growth, but I'll throw this number back up here. You could expect, if things were really, really good, potentially hitting in the 20s. And what I'm getting at is we're getting growth up there, but we don't necessarily believe we're meeting our potential. And this is kind of what Commissioner Baker was alluding to, I believe. So I'm going to start read this quotation real quick. But the question of what regulates elk productivity is a practical interest, because effective management depends on understanding how the multiple factors may limit or interact to affect populations. And the multiple factors is a really good word here, because productivity does involve multiple steps and multiple factors and influences. And some of those influences include spring-summer nutrition, timing of breeding, your adult bull-cow ratios, and also, to some extent, the age of your cows. Now, I'm not going to go into, in the interest of time, get into this slide very much, but the point of this slide, and you all have it, you can look at it, it just shows that there's different times of the year where these influences can have an impact. And some of them, they're across the board, such as your spring-summer nutrition. It has an impact pretty much all across the board in the productivity of the elk. So let me go through a few of these real quick. The spring-summer nutrition. Cows need a great deal of digestible energy for lactation and to trigger ovulation. Nutritional demands of lactation during late spring through early autumn can affect pregnancy rates. Your percent body fat during the rut impacts breeding probability and timing. One study mentioned that the cow's got to be at 7% body fat or she's not even going to ovulate. Cows fed a low digestible energy diet did not enter estrus. I'll mention this study again here in just a moment. And high nutritional plain attributed to high instances of consecutive pregnancies in Kentucky. This is a pretty big deal here too, these consecutive pregnancies. We don't have any data that tells us we're getting consecutive year pregnancies up there, but we also don't have any that tells us we're not. So that is one thing that I'm particularly interested in. And then I just wanted to mention that vehicle activity in an area can cause elk to move away from roads and possibly use less desirable food sources. Now, this isn't to say that vehicles and elk aren't compatible. It's just that managers need to consider this when they're making decisions about where they want to put their efforts. So I mentioned this previous study, and I threw this slide up here because in this study that Cook did, he basically put his cow elk in 3 separate groups and fed them rations. And you can see the elk that were fed the high and medium rations, got 90% of them bred and 90% ovulated. So basically, if they ovulated, then they were bred. But when you drop down just a little bit to 9.55 on your DE, you only had 10% of your cow elk even ovulate, and all of them that ovulated were bred. But this showed a really, and there's other studies that he's done as well that are cited throughout this paper and others, but this digestible energy and crude protein is a significant thing that has to be considered when you're looking at productivity in elk, and it affects more than just whether or not the cow is going to ovulate, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So just so you know, I think most people know this, but I put it in here just for the quick educational and a transition. But over time, the crude protein and digestible energy in your plants is going to decrease. So however much energy you've got available in May and June is going to be quite a bit less in August and September. So that's an important thing to remember as well. So influences of your breeding males. Quite a bit of work has been done on this as well. Cows have a short estrus cycle, anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. And low ratio of male to female can reduce the number of young. Paternity strongly skewed towards larger males. And breeding of mature bulls resulted in the earliest dates of conception. Pregnancy rates increased as bull age increased. And then also rut decreased by 30 days when 5-year-old bulls were principal sires. So all this comes together, and I kind of summarize this here. And we talked quite a bit back in May about breeding bulls and the impact of taking big bulls out where you're harvesting. And I didn't do a very good job of explaining that, so I hope this slide does better. But yes, young bulls will breed, but they are less successful breeders. You have potential reduced pregnancy rates. You have a longer rut. And when you get a longer rut, you're going to have a delayed and desynchronized birth of your calves. So the idea there is you want as many of your calves dropping as close together as possible, get them an early start, and it also helps limit predation issues. And then also, this longer rut can get into this probability of consecutive year pregnancies. So I put this chart together to kind of do a visual of this, and what you see here, so you got your year starting in October running through September. And you have a cow that's bred in October, and she goes through her 250-day gestation period, and she drops a calf first part of June, and then she's going to spend the next 2 months feeding that calf and trying to wean it. Some of the literature I looked at said that you're talking about as many as 4 liters of milk per day that this cow is producing in this time period. So if everything goes well and she weans by the end of July, she's got basically 2 months, 55 days to recover before the rut begins. You increase that rut by 30 days, now your calf is not dropping until the end of June, and it's still going to take 2 months, maybe even a little bit more because of the quality of the food. So now you're looking at about a 30-day recovery. So this time of when they breed and your early rut and timing of breeding is very critical. And remember, the farther you get into the summer and early fall, those crude protein and digestible energy concentrations are decreasing in the plants. So, age of harvested males. I had this up just a second ago. Rut decreased by 30 days when the 5-year-old bulls were principal sires. This is what that slide that Steve had was alluding to. Was we went back and looked at how many the ages of all the bulls that have been harvested so far on the management area, and the average age is 5.9. And what we were getting at is 81% of those harvested males were 4.5 years old. So the following year, they would have been in this 5+ age group that was where you would like to see your principal sire. So that's what he was getting at on that. So large percentage of our males are adult males that are potential breeders in the future that won't be there anymore. So one other thing I want to talk to, and then we'll kind of wrap this up, is the impact of nutrition and early birth on your calves. I mentioned earlier that early birth favors survival from predators and harsh winters. You know, we're lucky that we don't have the harsh winters here that they have up in the west and the northeast. So that's to our advantage. But how can we use it to our advantage? Well, potentially with breeding yearlings. And a lot of people don't give this much thought about elk being ready to breed at 1.5 years, at least the cows. But there's been some work done that shows that if you got good body size the previous fall of your calves, there's a good chance that those cows could breed next year. And just across our state line in Kentucky, they attributed high instances of pregnant yearlings in Kentucky to the good nutrition that they had. So there's potential there to add some breeders to your population at 1.5 years old cows if you've got the proper nutrition out there. So I put this statement back up here again, but I added a word to it. So now it says effective management depends on understanding how the multiple factors may limit or interact to affect the Tennessee population. And several of you have alluded to this, how important it is to figure out what we need to do in Tennessee. So with that, I'll give you some of our short-term goals and some of the long-term goals that we would like to see happen. Right now, we're really interested in the pregnancy rates of our captured cows. Steve and the other guys are going to be starting to try to put radio collars on some more cows just as soon as the hunt is over next week. So if things are good, we would expect to see a lot of cows come back positive on that test. So if the answer is yes, that we're getting good reproduction, then, you know, we should probably in the long term look at evaluating our calf survival and also evaluating our cow survival. Director Carter mentioned that meeting that we had last week, and Dr. Joe Clark, he said that, you know, one of the best things you may be looking at, or the best way to look at what's going on in your elk herd, is just to evaluate your cow survival. So that's one of the things that he brought up. If we don't see a lot of cows pregnant and the numbers are low, well, then that's going to cause us to wonder about our protein energy content. You know, why is she not pregnant? Did she not have enough energy that she didn't ovulate? Was she pregnant last year and dropped the cow so late that she couldn't recover to be ready to breed? And then also evaluate our ratios of our adult bulls to our cows. Some other short-term goals that have already been brought up, increasing the number of collared elk. We're going to be working on that immediately. Review current survey methodology. One of the things that Dr. Clark is going to do is take back our survey and look at how we're going about doing it and see if we can do some things different to help with that CI. Maintain the current quotas on the management area while reproductive success is evaluated. And I'll mention this again in just a second. Analyze the genetic data. The University of Tennessee is doing some genetic work on the elk in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and I think they might be doing some work in Kentucky as well. And they've asked us for some DNA samples, some hair samples, and so we're going to give that to them and let them play around with them and see what they come up with. Trap and move nuisance animals on private land areas within the WMA, primarily Tackett Creek. Steve alluded to that. You know, we do have some elk moving off the management area onto private land that is still in the zone, but they're moving in a couple places in large numbers. So we want to take the opportunity to capture some of those and move them up to Tackett Creek and see if we can get a boost up there at Tackett Creek since we've got some control of that area now. And then also explore potential of limited hunting on private lands within the restoration zone. All of our hunting so far has been on the management area. Couple long-term goals: evaluating new population estimate techniques. More than one person today has alluded to how difficult these animals are to survey. But just 10 years ago, we would be saying the same thing about other species, that now we've got a pretty good handle on how to get in there and get some good numbers. So we're optimistic that they'll eventually get there with elk. They're currently looking at some other options with DNA. So we'll obviously be interested in how those studies proceed. Potentially see if we can do some work evaluating the crude protein and digestible energy levels in the food sources that the elk are utilizing in the summer and autumn. What are those levels? Is there anything we can do through fertilization or changing around the plant community composition to get more protein and energy out there available? Implement a research project that evaluates the reproductive and recruitment success, survival, and then acquire more animals. There's still potential there. Hopefully, that we can eventually get some more animals. We're always that's always in the back of our mind. We still have 199 before we even reach our original goal of 400. And then we'd like to develop some additional wildlife viewing opportunities as well. So to summarize, as an agency, we're optimistic that the herd is growing, slowly to moderate, maybe a better word, but we do see in our trends that we're getting some growth. The question that we have is are we meeting our potential? Can we do more to get that growth rate up at a higher rate? The literature indicates that nutrition, followed by age of the breeding bulls, are limiting factors of productivity. So currently, the recommendation that we had come out of Region 4 was that we maintain our current hunting opportunities on the management area while we look at these issues of reproductive success, survival, and population estimate methods. And then, I don't know when we'll get there, but we still are interested in evaluating opportunities that allow us to offer some limited hunting opportunity on the private lands within the elk restoration zone. And that just comes down that we have more control on managing the populations on the managed area within the zone than we do on the private land. So we feel like if we can study those animals a little harder and get a feel of what's going on, we can do a lot more on the management area, and hopefully they'll serve as a source and spill out as a source onto the private lands. And with that, I hope that may have answered a couple of the questions that you guys had. I mean, there's definitely a couple of long-term ideas that we've put out there research-wise to look at some of these things, and I'll be glad to try to entertain any questions you have.
All right, who wants to be first? Mr. Cox?
I'll take it first.
Okay.
Dan,
Yes, sir.
what kind of percentage you think we've got bulls to cows in the herd?
I don't know, Commissioner Cox, that's one of the things that we said we would like to do in a short-term study or a long-term, and it will probably depend on, once again, all these things interact, and some of this data is information that we've really not been collecting, and hopefully we can start collecting it. I think, or I believe, if we start doing more daytime surveys where we can get a better look at these animals and record what we believe are older bulls. I didn't get into it here because there was so much information that you could put out there, but there's other papers that talk about using antler size as your kind of your idea of where your bulls are in their age classes and things like that. But I couldn't begin to answer. Steve may want to take a stab at that, but and there's one survey or one paper that even recommended that you set your hunting seasons to get away from targeting these older bulls in your hunting seasons. Now, I don't know that we need to do that because we're taking 5 a year, but I just think it just needs to be considered and remembered that, overall we're not hunting a great percentage of our elk population. We're hunting in 5 zones, so the harvest we're getting is coming out of a focused area, and we've taken, I believe it was 27 bulls in 6 years, Steve. That's right, somewhere around that. So that's one of those things, Commissioner Cox, that needs to be looked at. We need to start trying to collect that data.
Well, the more you talk, the more questions I've got. You just made the statement now that we've taken 27 bulls off one mountain, and the elk don't migrate. there's a fence around that area up there, that those elk stay right there. So we've taken 27 or whatever it is out of a herd that doesn't move anywhere else. That's not true.
And I don't think I said that, Commissioner Cox.
Well,
I
you
said
didn't say that, but
general
I'm saying
area.
you're indicating that the effect of what we're taking every year is magnified because it affects that one spot. And you and I both know, and Steve and I have talked about it, those bulls roam all over the mountain, everywhere up there. And while the information you've given us is interesting information about the dynamics of the elk herd, it sounds like you're saying that taking 5 bulls out of a herd of arguably 200 bulls affects, like you have indicated, and I just think that's misleading.
Well, I'm not up here to mislead the commission, Commissioner Cox. I'm just telling you what the literature says, and there's plenty of work out there that says that this is a factor. The age of your bulls that are doing your breeding is a factor, and
Don't you
that's
think that
the point we're making.
Don't you think the old bulls up there that are the herd bulls are over 5 years old? I mean, your argument was that the 5-year-old bulls are the herd bulls, and they're doing the breeding. I would think it'd be a 7, 8, 9-year-old bull.
I think the literature would say that the work they did was with up to 5 years, so the literature would say that bulls 5 years and older are doing your primary breeding.
Commissioner Cannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just 2 comments. First off, my wife's words are ringing in my ears, and that is sometimes I may not come across as kidding. Steve, I was kidding as far as the numbers that you threw up here. It's good information. Thank you. And unfortunately, I'm a numbers geek. That's what I do day in and day out. I really do appreciate the numbers. So that was a kidding statement. The second thing is, I think we've got a lot of numbers and we've got a lot of yardsticks. And sometimes when you have this many numbers and this many yardsticks, we can confuse ourselves and have a tendency to overcompensate towards being conservative. I don't know if this is applicable or not, but I went to your productivity slide. Maximum rate is 24% per year. If I just cut that down to 10%, then Director Carter, your number is pretty darn close. We're in the beginning to middle of the 400s range. And my point in all of this, my sole point in all of this, is not to say that, oh my gosh, we have a problem with the elk or the numbers are wrong. Terrible, terrible. That's not the point. The point is, I think the agency and his partners began a program back in 2000, is that correct, Ed? That I think has been remarkably more successful than maybe what some of the numbers we are throwing out there indicate. And I'll bet everybody in this room a steak dinner that that's the case. It's just, I think we have a remarkably successful program. I'm looking forward to honing in on what that number is, because y'all have done a heck of a job. And our partners that we listed up there have done a heck of a job. And I think there's a lot of good things happening there that, unfortunately, because of a lot of the yardsticks that are here, and I understand the literature, I believe it may be indicating such conservative numbers that some people may get a flavor that we're not having a successful program, much less as successful a program as what I believe we truly are having. And so I'm looking forward to proving that and having the numbers prove that. And that's my sole point in all this.
Dan, it seemed like when we were setting the elk season, didn't we close down the zone that you were referring to that we've taken the majority of the elk out of in the last few years?
Yes, sir. We closed 2 zones for this year and opened up Braden Mountain and Tackett Creek.
Well, obviously, I don't know the physical condition of the hunters that got drawn, and that obviously has a factor in it, but it'll be interesting to see if we put hunters in those areas, what the report comes back as far as the elk sightings that they've seen and that sort of thing. I mean, I've elk hunted a lot, and elk can disappear overnight from a minute pressure, temperature change, weather, the whole thing. And I just wonder, I can't believe that these elk are any different from the western elk, that they're not going to bust and go somewhere else with pressure and that sort of thing. It'd just be interesting to me to see if we don't have hunters that are going to hit those areas, and do we have personnel that routinely go in those areas and pursue and see what the at least the sign of elk that are using those areas? Do
Yes,
we have that?
Yes, we'll start doing the surveys in November and December, and they'll be in those areas working and looking to see what they're having. So, and I'm remember what Commissioner Cannon just said, and it rings true. I mean, everybody in the region and the state believes the elk population is doing well, but when you look at it, we're saying, it can go so much further with some work, and that's what we're getting at. And yes, the elk move around, and an elk that's in that zone that's closed down, could it move over into another zone and be harvested? Well, absolutely, but you still have your general cores. And I just wanted to add, at Tackett Creek, talking about looking around, Steve had an intern this summer, spent quite a bit of time at Tackett Creek trying to get some feel for what was going on up there with the number of elk. And we discussed this, we didn't put in the presentation, but we're not getting the influx of elk from Kentucky that we thought we would. As many as they've put in, you would think Tackett Creek would have more animals in there with their elk zone touching the entire border, and some of it even being up in Kentucky. So we're certainly not getting the movement there we thought we would.
But in Tackett Creek, based on, you said we're bordering Kentucky, but on their side, is there a lot more habitat that they can?
Steve would have to answer that.
I mean, it sounds to me like we got a multifaceted thing. There's
Absolutely.
so many factors that can be involved in the health of our herd. But obviously we need more habitat. Is there a plan of how we're going to treat royal blue, like Commissioner Baker said? Or is there a plan there that we're going to try to increase the habitat, or do we have a goal of just maintaining 400 elk from this point on? Well,
Dan's goal is not to maintain 400. I'd like to see it grow and address what Commissioner Baker said, and Steve alluded to it. UT is looking at some work right now on these forested areas, herbicides, and the burning is the thing that we're really interested in, because you can get so much bang for your buck going in there, burning that area out and getting that flush of vegetation. And so we're really interested in that and putting a lot more pounds on the ground. But at the same time, I think it's important to see what's coming in, if they're utilizing it, and what kind of protein levels and energy levels are in that food source, because you just said it, and this slide here said it, there's so much going on. And the thing to me that intrigues me is these these female cows are basically, they're in some sort of cycle of breeding almost year round, whether it be gestation, lactation, or trying to recover for the rut, where when you get in, people talk a lot about, want to compare elk to deer. With elk, gestation period is what, 30 a month to 40 days less than the elk. So big difference, and a lot more energy needs in an animal as large as the elk than a deer. So, I mean, you got to get the food on the ground for them, and provide as much food throughout the whole year that you can. And I appreciate your questions about that, because it is something we're looking at.
Commissioner Teague?
Yeah, I was going to see if I could ask for us to try to develop some type of management plan specifically related to habitat. I think we could definitely do some more intensive survey methods, but that's obviously difficult. There's plenty of people in this agency that can see areas that are suitable, that are protected from roads and farmers, and in areas that the management would have the most effect. And regardless of how much it is, if we just had a plan, whether it's a 5 or 10 year plan to try to increase suitable habitat or create new habitat every year,
Right.
Instead of kind of talking around about a bunch of stuff, and if obviously that there's staffing needs or equipment needs or interns or whatever we need to do, I feel like we may not be able to get a great grasp of an exact population. And a lot of that, obviously, we're talking about because we want to know how much we can hunt or how much we shouldn't hunt. But the habitat is always going to be a limiting factor. So the more we create, the better chance we have. And I realize there's some restrictions there based on land that we share with other people or endangered species or whatever it may be. But there's still going to be some areas that are suitable and some areas that we can make a difference. And I just personally, I'd like to see little direction as far as that goes and say, look, this is an area we're going to do in 2016, and you know, kind of have a plan whether we can get it all or not, but what would be the ideal situation, and we'll see what's possible and what we can fund.
Well, I'll just add, that's the point of this presentation was to bring the commission up to date on where we are, give you folks a literature review on some of the things that impact productivity. And, as the director said, we've already had one meeting recently regarding the models, but the whole idea is to take all these things and put together some direction, get some direction and put together exactly what you're talking about, what we want to do over the next few years.
I realize there's a
Without
few
program.
people doing an awful lot, and we're asking a lot of questions that, we may not have the resources or manpower to date to be able to answer, but I'd like to see a plan that's basically the ideal situation in y'all's eyes of what we can do to maximize our elk herd to make it better than is even feasible, and then we'll try to figure out what areas of that plan that we can implement.
Fair enough.
Are there any other questions from the commission for Mr. Gibbs? Any comments from the audience? Thank you very much, Dan. And
Thank you.
it's good that we even have these problems. Really, it's nice that it's a good problem to have that we even are discussing it. So appreciate the effort y'all are going to.